Welcome to today's show. I have with me JT Compeau, and he is with the content interpreter, and his expertise is helping people communicate. So, tell us a little bit about your background, JT, and how you got started doing what you do.
Absolutely. And Ken, I just want to say thank you so much for having me on the program today. This is exciting. It's great to
I
be here.
think so.
My background, well, it's an interesting story actually, and that's what I'm all about. Really, is storytelling. I started out in the media space, so media research, consumer insights, that sort of space, working on new business pitches, working on research for major blue chip clients in the CPG, telecom, and as well as the consumer electronics spaces. And through that, through a rather circuitous path, I started working for a startup firm in the ad tech, what they call ad tech, short for advertising technology space. And I started working with a lot of folks that are brilliant at what they do, such as engineers and product managers, but aren't necessarily storytellers. And as part of working for that firm, I worked with a PR consultant they had brought in to write pieces that would be publishable in the trade press. We didn't know how it was going to go. I was directing client services for that firm at the time. And it turns out they just kept picking them up. And I found myself translating all these stories and making sure that the brilliant work that these engineers, product managers, and even some of the folks in the upper levels of the firm were getting their point of view heard. We're getting their voices heard. And so I thought, wouldn't it be fantastic if I could do this across industries, working with thought leaders, entrepreneurs, and C-suite members. And that was what led me to start the Content Interpreter. Now, parallel to that, I have been in Toastmasters for over a decade now, and I have a couple of their awards to my credit. So it was these two paths kind of intersecting in a very unexpected way that led me to start this business.
Well, this is so interesting, and it's kind of one of the things that I see a lot in business, and in particularly in our industry, in the copier space, is that too often people don't take advantage of the stages that might exist around them. Part of it is not being able to convey their story, maybe, but I think that there's a lot of opportunity that get missed when people don't go out and tell the story about their business and about how they help people.
For sure. I think that people underestimate how much other people want to hear their story. And when I say their story, not just a biographical outline or narrative, but how are you connected to your business? Why is it that you do what you do? What is your origin story? I think people find those things very interesting, and I think that if you're coming at this from the perspective of a business owner, if you're able to share why your business means so much to you, I think that is likely to inspire buyers, or at least fans that can become potential buyers later down the road.
Oh, I agree 100%. So you have a three-step process for translating expertise for the stage. You want to share what that process looks like?
Absolutely. And what I always say about this three-step process, three phases to a successful speech is what I call it, is that it is simple, but not easy. So the first part, and I think I should preface this whole thing actually by saying that the speech writing process, at least the way that I do it, is very collaborative. And so when I'm working with clients, I ask a lot of their time on the front end. And then the time that we're working together, it becomes less and less intensive on their schedule as we go along. So the first phase is what I call discovery. And that involves, that's actually two phases in one, really. The discovery phase is made up of an introductory kickoff call. So I may take 60, 90, 120 minutes, however much you can give me, really. And just having a conversation about what you're trying to say, what your real message is. But by this point, we would have already had a couple of consultations, and an agreement would have been signed. So I know what you're aiming for, but this really kind of digs in and makes sure that I understand your perspective. I understand your voice, which can involve things that are that is as nitty-gritty as a turn of phrase, how you speak, how you relate, that sort of thing. So I'm looking for all those things. I'm listening for the stories, and I'm trying to divine what are the pillars, what are the stories on which a great speech or presentation can rest. So that's the first part of it. The second part doesn't have to go in order, but I also will have come to that call having read your book, your articles, watched your videos, listened to your podcast episodes, whatever I can get my hands on, and whenever people want to send me, so that I get the fullest representation of who that person is. It's really important for me to understand that. That's kind of a behind the scenes, inside baseball type of situation. So that's the first phase, discovery. The second is what I call the insights phase. And since I used to work in consumer insights, this is where that part of my training comes in. And I look at everything that we've talked about, everything that I've consumed about that particular person. And I said, it's not a specific number each and every time, but usually here are 3 to 5 things, items, anecdotes that really jump out at me as a layperson. In 99.9% of the cases in which I'm working, I am the layperson. I can never hope to catch up to someone who has years or decades of experience in their particular field, but I do know as an audience member, a surrogate audience member, as a layperson, what would jump out to me. And so I present those insights to the client. I'd say, hey, and this is actually based on a true story here. Hey, when you were talking about how to run a successful practice in orthodontistry, you kept mentioning your mother here. Let's dig a little bit into that. And how does mom relate? In that particular case, mom was also an orthodontist herself who had studied under one of the gentlemen who is considered to be the father of modern orthodontistry. There was a lot of stories, a lot of things to unpack there, and we used that to frame this seminar that he was giving. So the thing about the insights phase that I find particularly fascinating is that a lot of people think when they go off on a tangent that, let's get back to what we were really talking about. Like, no one's going to care about that. No one cares about, what my mom, said to me about this, or, when she used to take me into her office on snow days and I get to see how she'd work. And that is precisely the stuff that people really do care about. It can be used as a framework to present some of the often very technical material that my clients have to present because they're experts. And then the third phase is writing and editing. And that is the phase where it's mostly on me. I'll work with clients, make sure that they're comfortable with, again, turns of phrase, using this story over that story. How representative do they feel it is of their voice? Like, does it capture the things that they really want to say? And we do that over and over again until it's perfect. And Scott Pelley of CBS News once gave an interview comparing, because he was once the anchor of the CBS Evening News, and I always thought this was very apt. He compared the writing style of working on the evening news versus 60 Minutes. And he said, in the evening news, on the 60 Minutes rather, we write and rewrite until it's perfect. And in the evening news, we write and rewrite until it's 6:30. So I get a little bit of both in what I do, because there are deadlines, but I want to make sure that the client is feeling that this work that we've created together, not me on my own, but together, is representative of them and their expertise and how they want to have a dialogue with the audience.
Okay. Well, very nice. So what would you say are the 4 essential elements of every speech?
Well, when I talk about representing a particular client, there are 4 elements, there are 4 filters through which that concept of being representative must pass. So the first one is authenticity, second, accessibility, third is clarity, and fourth is empathy. So authenticity is about making sure that that's how they actually speak. I think a lot of people think that they have to sound a certain way, and it is totally okay to have role models in orators and public speakers, people that you want to emulate in terms of the quality of their skills. But the audience wants to hear from you. So authenticity is a really big one in my book. Accessibility is where I think I personally add a lot of value, being their collaborator, being their coach. What is it that is going to hook an audience? Even if you, and I worked with a client once that is one of the experts in team dynamics and team leadership. She has a 4-phase model herself, and we were talking about all of that and how should it be presented in the speech, and should we build it in different blocks, and this was being presented in front of 150 physicians and ER staff. So it's very important to act well as a team when you're in these high pressure situations. And even though every single person in that audience has medical training, obviously, and they all understand some of the more technical aspects of that speech, you have to find a way in to that audience to make it accessible. And the joke that I always make with clients is that if I somehow crashed your speech, like if I wandered into the wrong hotel ballroom and I had no idea what you're talking about from a technical perspective, there should be some kind of storytelling element in there that will make it relevant to me, even if I don't completely understand everything that you're saying. So that is a big one, accessibility. The third one is clarity. And that's not just being clear in your message, but clear in your intent. One of the first questions I ask clients when I start working with them is, what is your goal? Is it lead generation? Is it to inspire, to entertain, to inform, to change hearts and minds? What is it that you're going after? And so when we look back at the when we take the finished piece of work and we look back at those original goals, we want to make sure that those line up. So clarity in message, clarity in intent. And then the fourth one is empathy. And that was one that I actually added as of last fall. I was working with a couple of executives simultaneously. One was for a gaming company and the other was for a well-known camera, consumer electronics company. And they both were asking me questions about, well, how do we make sure that we acknowledge how tough a year 2020 has actually been? And I started thinking about this more and more, and I said, well, why should this be a trend just for the COVID era, which I don't even really like to say. I hope it's not I guess it has been an era, but it's still kind of hard to acknowledge that. Why can't we use empathy as one of those filters in all of our communication? In each communication, in every speech, in every presentation, we are serving an audience, and we want to make sure that we are honoring and respecting them in whichever way is appropriate, given the context of the speech. For example, who that audience is and what you're trying to say, what your message is, what your goals are. So empathy definitely got added to the list just as of last year. And now I approach all of the work that I do with that element added. And now there's 4. And there used to be 3, but there's 4 now.
4 now, huh?
Yeah.
Okay. and so then let's talk about the power of storytelling. Because I'm, excuse me, people that have listened to me know I tell lots of stories. I teach service management. and there's not a class goes by that I don't relate a story or two. So tell me about the power of storytelling and bringing your personal story to enhance your expertise.
This is so important. I touched on it a little bit with my example of the orthodontist. And I'll elaborate on that a little bit. So as I said, his mother is / was, I believe she's retired at this point, was also an orthodontist. She studied with the father, the man that's considered to be the father of modern orthodontistry. She used to take him into her office on snow days because she felt, I guess, like all moms feel about their kids, like, well, you shouldn't be idle. You should be doing something, even though it's a snow day. And so she used to bring him in, and he used to watch her and how she would interact with the patients and how she used to run the business side of things. He has a very successful practice here in New Jersey, which is where I'm coming from. And we just started talking about these things, and he was trying at the time to enhance parts of a seminar that he was giving on a particular procedure. And, I couldn't even begin to tell you exactly what that procedure entails, but all I could say is that it's the gist of it was, we're not going to focus just on the teeth. We're going to focus on the whole mouth, and that is promoting holistic well-being. And we're not just about straightening teeth and off you go. We're about making sure that the whole person's life, the person's whole life rather, is enhanced by what we do here, which is a great, inspiring topic, but a lot of technical aspects to it. And so these stories about his mom, and then when you learn that his mom studied with such a prestigious figure in this field, you started to get this through line through everything else that he was saying, had a connection. There was a sense of history and a sense of legacy there that the audience, who are all either orthodontists themselves running the practice, or they were hygienists in the audience, they would have an appreciation for this, because this is the field that's literally the business that they've chosen, as the famous quote goes. Yeah. And so you see this through line through that, and a history and a legacy. And I said to him, I said, there's no way that you can't not include this. I think there were some references to it in the original, but we had to really beef it up, because I said, this is just too powerful. And if you use it to serve as a framework, and then also as interstitials between some of the technical aspects, you're making sure that the audience kind of joins you for the next wave, right? Because they're waiting to hear this story. So there's really nothing more powerful than storytelling, I think, as a business owner, and being able to tell it well, obviously, I think leads to exponential results, dividends.
Well, and I'd agree with that. It's kind of interesting. I had another gentleman on that, and we talked about the power of storytelling, both inside and outside the business. The fact that if you can get people that you work with to buy into the story about where you want the company to go, you start to get an emotional connection. I think that's maybe what story does more than anything else, is it builds the emotional connection. You can present all the facts in the world, but if you don't get people connected emotionally, it becomes much less effective.
100%. There's a great TED Talk, the title of which is escaping me, embarrassingly enough, but I remember the woman who gave it. Karen Eber is her name, and she has a great line in there, and she says, data never speaks for itself. And as a writer, that's one of those lines that you hear. It's like, oh, I wish I had thought of that, because it's so great. It also brings to mind a story, and I think as a fellow business owner, you'll appreciate this, Ken. We all have humble beginnings. My very first client, no joke, my very first client was the president and CEO of a small family-owned transportation logistics company that, since I think his grandfather came over here in the early part of the 20th century has gone through many different iterations. Now, today, it's a trucking logistics company. He hired me specifically to write a speech that would tie, again, giving that sense of history, that sense of legacy, that would give the new employees a sense of the history as they're walking into the company. So every time that he would welcome a new bunch of people, that was the speech that he would use to deliver to the employees. And you say, why is that funny? The funny part is, on my end, the growing pains. I was just working with a career coach at that time that was largely responsible for planting the seeds of what this business would become and is today. And I remember going to her and saying, I'm so excited. I got my first client and we're doing this speech, and it's got so much great storytelling and this and that. And she said, great. What did you happen to charge? And I held up the check and it was for $75. And she said, that's great that you got a client, but never do that again. Let's rework on your offering. Let's package it so that you can hit much higher next time. So that is my inspirational story too, to everyone that might be listening, that is thinking about starting their own business, that it's okay to make mistakes, and it's okay to stumble. Just make sure that you don't go it alone, because I had a fantastic career coach that straightened me out after that one.
I'm a fan of coaches. I have a couple of coaches that I use, and I coach other people, because I work with my service managers that I teach, and I continue after they're out of class, trying to help them be successful, because if they're not successful, I've wasted my time, and that's not what I want for them. I want them to be hugely successful.
Absolutely. So what does that look like? I'm curious. So what does success look like?
Success, it's interesting. I will tell you the story of what I think success for them is. In most copier dealerships, the service manager is kind of the mushroom of the managers. They keep him in the dark and feed him the manure. And I tell my service managers that come through my training program is that I hope that when we're done, that they'll be able to sit at the big table when the decisions are being made. But they have to have the skill set to be able to earn that position. It's not they can just go in and sit down. They need to be able to understand what it's like to think about a business and treat it like it is a business, understand ROI, understand how to manage people, how to care for customers. There's so many things they have to learn. But as they start to do that, and as they start to gain credibility within the company, then pretty soon they'll be somebody that will be asked for their opinion and have that opportunity to sit at the big table.
So you think like a decision maker, and then over time you become one.
Exactly. Well, and you learn to look at it from an owner's perspective. I think that's the big challenge, and I encourage them actually to teach their technicians to think about their area of responsibility like it was their business, to make decisions like it was. Let's make good business decisions. Don't just go out and throw parts at a machine, but let's think our way through it. Let's try to make sure that we make good decisions, because as a manager, if you build people that can make good decisions on their own, guess what happens to your workload? It goes way down.
Yeah. Well, I think that is a huge gulf. And when I think about when I was first hired after college for my first job, that's not something that you're really taught. And I don't think a lot of people, and I'm not disparaging the folks that first hired me, and quite frankly, they gave me a shot and changed my life forever. So God bless them. But I don't think that that's something that's necessarily taught either before or after a young person graduates from whatever school it was that they were attending. So I think it's really important to instill that in folks. So you're doing tremendous work. You should be very proud of this.
And so now I have to tell you the story.
You got to, you have to tell.
Okay.
That's how I coax it out of you. See,
well, it is part of what caused me to do this, because officially I retired. 3 years ago. And the one thing that I left my previous job where I supported service managers was this gnawing ache at watching service managers fail. They would take, because the traditional path in our industry was that they would walk up to their best technician and they say, "Congratulations, you're the service manager."
Yeah.
And then turn around and walk off and leave him.
Yeah.
And I remember sitting at a desk with one of the service managers that had that happen to him. And he looked at me and he said, "Ken, I hate my job. I hate, and when he first got the job, he was so excited and so happy. And he said, "I hate my job." And very shortly, he went back to being a technician because he did not want to be a service manager. But it was because he didn't have the skills. He knew how to fix equipment. He didn't know how to help people improve. Nobody ever taught him that. He turned a screwdriver and fixed equipment. He was very good at it. But with proper training, he could have been very good at helping his team. And he just never got the training needed. And part of it is that as an industry, there wasn't a really good program for it. And because they never get training, that's why they become the mushrooms of the company, because they don't know enough about business to be effective. And
Sure.
so I said, that's something I can fix. Those are people that I can help by building a program and starting to provide the training they need to be successful. And, it's something I'm passionate about. I love what I do.
That's awesome. So I have to ask, because that bring in, and forgive me if I'm asking too many questions. This is your show. Okay. But I'm curious because it is on topic with what we're saying about storytelling. So what would you say, the connective tissue between the skill sets of being a technician, fixing the equipment, to becoming that service manager? Like, how do they bring everything that they learn as a technician forward with them into what may seem like a very different job? And as that one guy that you were describing seemed to say, like, a job that you could potentially hate if you don't have the skill set.
I think that understanding the technical piece of it makes managing it easier. Because if I've seen managers come in that were managers that didn't understand the technical side, and they struggled with understanding that piece of it. I think that if they've come through the ranks and they know what it's like to be a technician, then it's just helping them think about how is it that I help? How can I help my technicians? It's quite interesting because most of them don't have any idea of all the pieces that make up the role of being a manager or a supervisor. Mm-hmm. And I walk one of the very first lessons we walk through, because you've got to know management, you've got to be a leader, you've got to understand coaching, you've got to understand mentoring, you've got to understand time management. You have all of these pieces that you need to learn. But when they started as a technician, they had to learn that skill as well. So it is a teachable skill. It's not like I don't want to say this. It's not something that is not teachable.
Right.
They can learn to do all of those things and be very successful at it.
Are you a fan of the analogy that it's like conducting a symphony rather than being, and I'll say this in air quotes, just a cellist, right? Like the cellist has to be in there and they have to know when to come in and timing and everything, but the conductor has to hear all the pieces, like how they all fit together. It's very different.
Yep. And it's really interesting because somebody used that analogy on one of my podcasts, and I forget the gentleman's name. He was telling he drew a comparison. He is a professional musician, and he drew a comparison in management to being the conductor. Instead of going from being the cellist, and knowing your piece, now you have to understand all of the pieces. And I love that. I love that analogy. And I like the piece that he mentioned too, that the conductor doesn't try to play the horn. He doesn't try to play the cello. He doesn't play the piano. He just helps them understand how they can translate the sense of the music into their instrument.
Absolutely. Yeah. I love that. And I think that speaks to another benefit of the power of storytelling, another example of the power of storytelling, that I think a lot of people, as they think about their careers, whether you're an entrepreneur or you work for someone else, or maybe you have both things going at once, you have a side consulting gig, but your full-time industry is something different. I think that a lot of people are not taught to think about how their career forms a narrative. And a narrative can include much more than just, well, I was an analyst, and then I was a senior analyst, and then I was a manager, and then I was it doesn't necessarily have to be this linear progression. It can be more about, how am I bringing all of the tools in my toolbox to the next role, to this role. And if you understand, I think, philosophically what you're good at and how you add value, you can do a lot more. You can serve in a lot more roles in your industry, or maybe even outside of your industry, than you think you can. And I always love that part, that way of thinking, and transferring that to the process that I use with clients, because I think that a lot of the clients, the best people that I've worked with, have come away with it understanding themselves better, and the better that they understood themselves, the more that they were able to connect with their audience. And I'm not saying that's because of me. I'm just saying that because they did the work and they allowed me to kind of dig around in there a little bit more than they usually would, or reflect on it a little bit more. That's what creates richer material, richer content that then can carry over into your day-to-day, your real life experiences, professionally speaking.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
Yeah, that does.
Maybe a bit too out there, but that's how I think of this. It's living and breathing. It's not just about the time that you're on stage or the words that are on this page. It's really about connection with the audience, but also connection with your story and your material.
Yeah, it was interesting, and I think I mentioned this when we talked before, that I just went through a speech class, and it was interesting that I learned a lot. I learned the value of this, telling the story in your speech, more than I had had been using it. Because too often we can get up and we can speak and be not very knowledgeable about a subject, and we can deliver a great deal of content,
Mm-hmm.
but never connect with the audience. Whereas if we use the power of a story and interweave it with the content, then all of a sudden we've brought the, and you kind of use it, we brought the audience along on the journey with us.
Yes.
And the result is they remember things that they might not elsewise remember.
Absolutely. I have a similar experience with that. I was working on a talk for a very specific purpose. I had a very specific goal in mind, and it was basically to invite people, hey, come work with me. And I decided, because I also believe in using coaches, that I wasn't going to go this alone. And not because I couldn't do it myself, because I clearly could, but because I knew that this person that I hired to collaborate with me would not see myself. And because she was particularly gifted at crafting talks that are designed to not only sell, I mean, they were primarily meant to sell, but also designed to tell a story. I said, that's what I want, because there's a very particular nuance to that. And if you don't unearth the right material, you may miss an opportunity. You don't even realize that you've missed it, because what you didn't say, you don't know what the impact of that is. It's only until it's unearthed and included as part of your speech or presentation that it really makes a difference. So even for myself, I wholeheartedly believe in this. And the reason that I did it primarily was because I knew that collaboration is key, and that going it alone can be costly.
It can be. You know what, JT, you've been a great guest. I've enjoyed our conversation. For the audience, if you're watching on the replay, do us a favor, leave us some comments. If you have any questions for JT, you want to go ahead and put them in the comments. We'll be glad to get some answers. There will be a link to, in fact, you want to tell the audience about the gift you're giving them?
Absolutely. So thank you so much. Yeah. So you go to my website, that's contentinterpreter.com/free-guide. And there are videos that you can receive from me, kind of thought starters, videos that are full of insights, just 2 to 3 minute clips that you'll get every day in your email that will get you started on writing your own speech or crafting your own presentation with the themes that I discussed today in mind. So I hope you find those useful. I think that I've gotten a lot of good feedback from them, so I hope you enjoy.
And what we will do is there will be a link in the comments on YouTube. There'll be a link in the post on LinkedIn so that everybody can find it quick and easy. And we'll see everybody next week.
Thanks, Ken.